So without further ado, MetLife's Chief Technology Architect, Seidita.
Thank you, Phil. You can count on it.
Yes.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about cloud architecture. When Phil approached me and said that they were looking for topics for the ITR conference, and that cloud was one of the major things that people wanted to talk about, we probably had a number of different topics we could have spoken of. We have a lot of great things going on at MetLife. There's one that comes to mind around this thing we call our Global Technology and Operations Platform, which is going to provide a platform for internal or external consumption of APIs, so that for things like filing claims, doing servicing, sales, new business, underwriting, all of these business capabilities that we're getting after, we could actually create a platform that developers somewhere else in the world could actually be riding on our insurance and investments platform. And we have to figure out how to monetize some of these things from a business perspective, but that's a very exciting thing that we're working on. And I want to bring that up right from the beginning, because everything you're going to see now around what we're doing around cloud is very technical in nature, but it is supporting exactly that. Every one of our business initiatives, we look at the cloud as in the multimodal IT, as we talked about earlier, or bimodal IT, as where we're going to leverage our this cloud infrastructure for our systems of engagement and systems of insight for things that we do with our customers. There's some of the family jewels that still are inside of MetLife on our legacy and core systems that are going to remain there, and we're going to leverage an API type of capability to be able to expose those externally. So let me start by talking about the cloud strategy and some of the key underpinnings of our cloud strategy within MetLife. And then I'll go into some of the architecture and technology. So first off, you're looking at a picture of what we call the house, okay? And at the top of the house are our two global technology and operations priorities. The first one is driving operating leverage, which is basically about saving money and driving cost efficiency. And the second one is about a differentiated or superior customer experience, which for us, when you think about cloud, is about speed. Speed of provisioning environments, speed of being able to develop new applications to provide business capabilities for our customers, and basically speed for us to be able to deploy capabilities. Within the house, okay, I'm going to continue with this little metaphor of the house, okay? There's the four pillars, okay? The first pillar is basically we're going to figure out which room in the house each piece of furniture is going to go in. And that means we developed an assessment model to be able to determine which business capabilities make sense for us to leverage from the cloud in a SaaS model, which applications make sense in an IaaS model to actually leverage the cloud for, and all of the technology standards and application development standards for applications going forward, whether they're going to ride on our internal or external cloud, okay? That includes things like an application being latency aware and instrumented and fault tolerant and secure and parallelizable and so forth, all of these things that we've defined. Okay. The second pillar in the house is getting the house in order. Okay. The house is a mess, we got to get the house in order. And what that means is we have to operationalize our cloud capabilities. To us, that meant figuring out what are the most prevalent environments that are being requested from our infrastructure teams by application teams in supporting the business. And it came out to some simple things like web servers, application servers, database servers. These are some of the things that are requested from infrastructure that are sometimes slow to provision in manual ways. And it became where operationalizing our model was about getting automation of everything that we do, so that in a self-service, unattended, automated way, we could provision these environments without involving the engineers. We want the engineers to be doing the fun work of defining the perfect environment, and we want the application development teams to be supporting the business in the business capabilities they're trying to deliver. So in the old days of projects at most of our companies, where the app team goes to the infrastructure team and provides a spreadsheet with all these requirements for their very specific environment, we're trying to get to the point where we deliver just vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, small, medium, and large, silver, gold, or platinum availability, and that project plan, rather than having 1,000 lines of infrastructure work in a business project, has one line: go provision your infrastructure in a self-service way. So that's part of operationalizing capabilities that we have for automation. The third pillar is actually moving the furniture. So we had to do a very deep look at cloud providers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, CSC, and a number of others, and we have volumes of assessment information on all. It's not a surprise that Amazon, from a capability perspective, is way up here. Microsoft's closely behind, and the others are kind of trailing behind those guys. You can go look at the Gartner Magic Quadrants or the Forrester Wave for that. But the one thing that we added in was relationship that we already have with that particular partner. And bringing a new vendor into a company, into a large company like MetLife, is a big deal. It costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, a lot of legal work, and so forth. So while Amazon is the highest in capability, we actually chose to stick with two of the partners that we already have very large deals with, and that's Microsoft and IBM. So our strategy currently is driving down the path of using Azure and SoftLayer for some of our cloud capabilities. We also, back in 2015, summer of 2015, in this third pillar, tested about 6 applications, and we actually moved those applications. Multiple application teams worked with us. We tried and learned, which was important. We had to fail fast, learn, and actually come up with new ways of doing some of our automation. The one thing that I think was most important that we learned is that there should be an entry criteria for folks to get the benefit of all the automation that we've built. And that is an application team that comes to us and says, you know what? Our app doesn't run on the latest version of these technologies. We need you to spin up, the old version, create us a blueprint for that. And we went through lots of gyrations and spent a lot of time, and what we learned is we don't want to do that. We want that to be an entry criteria. So if you're creating a cloud strategy that's similar to ours, you need to make sure that you're having an entry criteria that application teams are beholden to get to the latest technologies. That's part of their responsibility. The fourth pillar is that we don't want to scratch the floors while we're moving the furniture. So this is all about governance and compliance and data sovereignty, right? And in a sense, we don't want to get into a case where a team tries to do something where we need to throw them in the backyard of the house. So in essence, we've leveraged a global architecture review board process that we do have in place to review cloud requests for new SaaS products or new IaaS implementations that we do. So we've implemented all of those. In the foundation of the house, in the concrete, you see those 4 boxes. There's a number of different technologies that are key enablers. So first is encryption gateway, like a Cipher Cloud or a SkyHigh, to encrypt or tokenize PII or PCI or otherwise sensitive information that we need to put into the cloud. So a lot of times when you're using Salesforce.com, if your company's used that for customer relationship management, you're likely using one of these kinds of boxes to be able to tokenize that information, so you're not putting your sensitive information up in the cloud. Another technology enabler is identity management. Now, this is all about single sign-on and security and access management. If we have a model where we're providing both internal and external cloud capabilities for the applications that we provide to our business, we want to make sure that the user experience is very consistent. I don't care if the user comes in and happens to be using something that's running in Azure and then clicks a link on that website, and then now it happens to be accessing an application that's running in our data center. That needs to be seamless. It needs to be single sign-on. We don't want to create an experience for the user that is not superior. And then also we want to maintain our security posture for access management, irrespective of whether you're internal or external. The next box has 2 things in it: data integration and software tooling. The data integration is our API strategy. So this is the platform I talked about at the beginning, where through creating APIs around many of our systems of record, we're able to abstract away the complexities of those systems and support the business needs of the applications that need the data from those systems. So if we build an application in the cloud, we should be able to make a standard API call into an application that's running in our data center without having to know the intricacies or even the fact that we may have overlapping core systems that support these customers. The second one around software tooling, there's a sister program to our cloud program, which we call SDA, Software Delivery Automation. And this is where we're delivering contemporary technologies and tools for the software development community so that they can, in a more agile fashion, be able to leverage continuous integration, continuous deployment, and essentially deploy to environments that we're spinning up in the cloud program. The last box there around cloud and network management. Cloud management is where we need to have the ability to have a platform where we can create blueprints to be able to spin up these environments in an automated fashion and do it in a vendor-agnostic way so that we can have one platform to spin up these environments irrespective of whether it's Azure, whether it's SoftLayer, or whether it's a MetLife data center running on VMware. We have a unique situation. Actually, it's not a unique situation. We have a situation where we do business in some 46 countries. We support that at about 12 locations around the world where we have redundant pair of data centers. And we have to have the ability to do things on-prem in some countries because we're not allowed to use the cloud based on either customer contracts or the lack of existence of a cloud provider's data center in that country where data needs to remain. So one thing that when we started on the program was a key decision point for us was that we wanted to make sure that the provisioning capability we created worked exactly the same way, whether you're provisioning something in the cloud or on-premise within a MetLife data center. Because in some cases where we have a piece of software like this platform I was telling you about earlier, where we want to leverage that around the world, we don't want to have to do things differently if we're doing it in Turkey versus whether we're doing it in the United States or what have you. So that's the reason that we're trying to make it one consistent manner by which you actually provision these environments. And to boot, I would tell you that we're doing everything from the same front end where our business users or other users can like order an iPhone. So you order an iPhone in ServiceNow, you should be able to get the servers if you have access to be able to spin up environments. Finally, on network management, in this space, we actually, beyond just managing and monitoring the network, we want to have the ability to make our data center pair, which is a MetLife pair, as well as Azure or SoftLayer partner, look like one data center. We never want an application team to have to think about where they're going to land. They should not know. And so that cloud management is all about having an orchestration system, a cloud management platform that can abstract that away. So at a high level, this is kind of the strategy that we embarked on. And I'm going to focus on pillar 2 for a lot of this presentation, because I think that's now kind of into the tech of how we are doing all this. Okay. So first, I wanted to address SaaS and PaaS and IaaS, or as we call it, IaaS Plus. So we are absolutely leveraging a lot of SaaS. We've done it for, even before this program started, we were using Salesforce.com, we were using SuccessFactors, we use O365D, we have a number of different SaaS solutions. But the key with this is, as part of that assessment model, we have a MetLife business capability model. So all of the capabilities from sales to servicing to claims to billing and remittance to customer service, HR, finance, legal, those are all on our capability model. And we've identified those areas from a business perspective where it makes sense for us to leverage SaaS. So when a new project comes in from around the world that wants to go create some kind of a CRM system and buy something off the shelf, we say, no, our standard is Salesforce.com, and we'd like to drive that into those countries and with those projects. So we leverage the business capability model for that. We're not really focused on PaaS. And I'll tell you why. I don't really want to get tied to a particular vendor. So certainly with Cloud Foundry, you can install it in your own data center. Certainly with Bluemix, there's ways to do things in your own data centers or in IBM's. However, I do believe very strongly that when we think about some of the PaaS offerings that are out there, they're very sticky. It ties to that vendor, and it doesn't give us that agnosticism that we require so that we can have the vendor contestability that we seek to have as we drive our cloud program. And what we want to do instead is have the ability to do things, like I said before, consistently around the world with any vendor we choose. If that electrical outlet over there costs more than that electrical outlet over there, then I'm going to unplug and I'm going to plug into the cheaper one. Now that's a vision of the future. That's where we want to get to in the future. But if we tie ourselves to things that are very vendor specific, we're not going to be able to do that. So right now we're not driving in the PaaS space. Now on IaaS Plus, and I'm going to take you through each of these 7 areas that you see here. This is where I said we're going to get into what we're doing in pillar number 2 of operationalizing our capabilities. We have created a set of blueprints for all of these prevalently requested environments. And a blueprint is basically a bill of materials that includes everything on that particular environment that needs to be provisioned. And we've created that based on the standards that we have. We have then created this self-service, unattended capability to be able to give development teams the ability to provision their own environments out in the cloud. Now, in a future iteration of what we've got, the vision is that we'll have policy right in there in the automation so that we determine whether it goes on-prem or if it goes out to Azure or SoftLayer. We'll have that in some metadata. And in even future, beyond that, a further vision beyond that, we're actually driving to the place where during a project, an architect will actually assemble an environment based on what we have available in terms of blueprints. And you'll know what the development environment for this application looks like in metadata, the QA environment, the production and DR environments. And that metadata would be stored in a place that is accessible by the automation. So when it comes time in the project plan to spin the environments up, you're basically materializing the architecture that the architect had created for that particular application in an automated way from what they basically assembled in that metadata repository. So this way, when it comes time to provision something, the requester just goes in and picks the app, the location in the world they want it, and perhaps a very small few other things. The third one you see here is that we want to leverage MetLife, Azure, or SoftLayer data centers. And this was giving us, again, the ability or the need to create a capability that was agnostic of the vendor, the same blueprint being able to be stood up in any of their data centers, and it made us review all of our licenses. We need to basically go through licensors to make sure that we can bring our own license in some of these cases. We're also looking at some of the platforms that are available in some cases as like PaaS platforms. In Microsoft, they call them marketplace images. Everybody's got their various terminology for this. But in some cases where I could get a marketplace image for something, if it's more cost effective to do so. So if I need to get a SQL Server database from Azure, I can do so perhaps with a marketplace image if it's more cost effective to do so, and then I don't have to bring my own license. Data center shared services. So even if something is running out in the cloud, I need to be able to back it up, I need to be able to monitor it, I need to be able to patch it, all of the capabilities that you would expect. And I need to be able to report it back to the mothership. So that in our operations center, Dan Hedges, who's one of my peers in the enterprise infrastructure organization, he needs to have the ability to monitor her environments irrespective of whether they're running in the cloud or if they're running on our own premise. And therefore, if we have a backup or a restore that's required, even though that data may have been backed up in the cloud, he has a control center centrally where he can make sure that that restore happens properly and according to our standards. Software delivery automation. This is where what I talked about earlier, where our software developers are getting new and contemporary tools. Things like Git for source code control and Bamboo for the builds and the continuous integration. Artifactory for the artifacts. We're doing Sonar for code quality scans. We're doing Veracode for security penetration or security scanning, and then Urban Code Deploy to actually deploy those artifacts out to production. Cloud management. This is the cloud management platform that I talked about. We mostly use BMC tooling for a lot of our server provisioning, database automation, and so forth. And finally, something that's in progress right now is we're investing in exploring Docker and containers. And we've had a significant amount of success recently where we've been able to lower the cost of some of the environments that we're creating through a multidisciplined team that we put together to be able to drive this very quickly for us. Okay? So I'm going to go through some of these, and I talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to take you through each of these 7. So the first one is around the standard platform blueprints that we talked about. So it's a certified set of packages. So basically, if I have a database server that I'm going to be standing up, maybe it's a DB2 database server, not only does DB2 go there, but it's going to have a monitoring agent on it. It's going to have perhaps some database replication software that goes on it, and a number of other agents in the bill of materials that creates that entire platform so that I can provision it. And again, we started with the ones that you see under blueprints today. We took 2 web servers, 3 app servers, and 3 database servers that are typically requested. And we've created blueprints for them. And there's this concept of vintage, kind of like a bottle of wine, right? We have a vintage 2016 blueprint. And where you see here that it's a certified set of software packages that work together, we wanted to make sure that that blueprint was fully tested with all of the versions of each of the pieces of software that go on it, so that when we move from year to year, and I create a 2017 vintage as the next year's bottle of wine, we have the ability to upgrade all of those versions all together, as opposed to, I'm sure you've been through these, where the database team reaches out to the app team and says, hey, this year we're doing a database upgrade. We want to put you guys on the schedule. And no sooner do you finish doing the regression testing and roll out with the new database, do you get a call from the guy on the operating system team saying, hey, this year we're going to do the operating system upgrades. This allows us to do this one time, create blueprints that show up in that automated portal that I talked about, so that in 2017, when somebody goes to request something, if it is a new environment that they're creating, they're able to actually provision the newest blueprint. The only times we'd allow them to use the older ones if it's organic growth of an existing environment. Okay? We're also going to look at some blueprints in the future, a lot of open source that we're going to try to drive to, so we don't have to count as much as we do with our licensing for our commercial products. So we really want to drive into things like, and we use these already internally, but MongoDB is on there. We've got Postgres, Tomcat, as opposed to always using WAS or .NET. Some of these open source packages which will give us even more speed and cost efficiency. So then we built the environment that actually does the automation. Okay? So here what you see is a very high-level picture after the legal guys took everything else out of the diagram for me. Essentially from ServiceNow, okay, a developer goes in today to provision a dev test environment on their own, for example. Okay? And essentially what happens is with the BMC tooling that we have, the blueprints are sitting out there, okay, all those platform blueprints. And if one day an engineer were to drop a new blueprint there, the goal, doesn't work this way today, but the goal would be that that just automatically shows up on the portal, so that in the future somebody can start provisioning that new blueprint. We use the BMC tooling, Blade Logic, for server and database automation. So after the environment is spun up in the cloud, leveraging the policy that's stored in the orchestration system, determining whether it's Azure, SoftLayer, or on-prem. And by the way, think about it as one control point that ultimately, when we grow this out to EMEA and Asia, which is our intent for 2017, has the ability to provision from one control point in any of those data centers. So perhaps we'll have 12 locations around the world where you can spin something up all from one control center. It'll leverage the binary libraries where we put all the packages out there in those clouds to then spin up the environment, and then the database automation and server automation components start configuring that particular environment to order. And in using this, we've actually been able to see some significant savings in clock time, so duration, as well as in effort. So here, this is a graph of an April release we did this year and a July release, where here we're showing just the clock time, 86% average duration decrease, 51% average FTE hours that are going down. So we have been measuring these things so we can show what kind of value we're getting out of the automation. Because I think automation is just a foundation for us to be able to get to the speed that we require. And cloud is almost a byproduct of it, because we're trying to do this very similarly, whether it's Azure, SoftLayer, or internal. So I've removed the specific data center locations that we have on this slide, so it gets kind of boring to tell you the truth. But essentially, what I said earlier is what we're talking about here. So we actually have our three preferred pairs. We're IT people, right? So we think in terms of consolidation where it makes sense. We want to try to give our business the most cost-effective play possible. And that means having, in our case, 3 consolidated GDCs, as we call them, the global data centers, right? But really there are 3 pairs. We have 2 in the Americas, we have 2 in Asia, and 2 in EMEA, okay? And that's where most of the countries that we support out of those regions have their infrastructure and applications running. And therefore, we have Azure and SoftLayer data centers that have been selected where we're going to actually pair up, do those network connectivity things, make sure that we configure our cloud management platform to be able to push to those places. And as you see at the bottom here, we do have 9 other countries, I like to say, that we're stuck with. And the reason I say we're stuck with this in the nicest possible way, but because of data sovereignty or other regulatory reasons, we've got to have data that resides in those particular countries locally. So in those cases, in many cases, we have smaller data center pairs, but also in some cases, we have cloud providers that exist in a subset of those 9. Some of them won't or don't. They either won't have cloud because we're not allowed to, as I said before, contractual reasons with some of our customers or what have you, or they don't, meaning there are no cloud provider locations yet from some of the providers that we have. Again, more reason for us to go the IaaS Plus route to get to that vendor agnosticism and premise agnosticism, so we can spin stuff up inside, outside, or in any of the vendors, okay? And ultimately toward the goal of plugging into the cheapest outlet. Connectivity, I mentioned the use of NetBond. We don't use it everywhere. NetBond is expensive. It's from AT&T, and it provides a capability called carrier hoteling, which basically makes it easy for you to get from your data center to any of the cloud providers, in a nutshell. And in the US, we've crossed a threshold. We've created a model that allows us to determine when does it make sense. What revenue do we need in a particular region in order to be able to cross that threshold where we want to use NetBond rather than just VPN connections. NetBond gives you a lot more capability in terms of robustness and monitoring and so forth. However, it's basically a cost-benefit comparison that we do. So in the United States, we decided to use NetBond. In EMEA and in Asia, we're just using VPN connections, and we do have another location, one of the other 9 that I mentioned, that I'm not going to tell you which country it is, but we have an MPLS direct connection because NetBond's not available yet from AT&T. Though it will be at some point, and we'll move that route. Okay? Now within the cloud, and Azure and SoftLayer call this different things. In Azure they call them subscriptions, in SoftLayer it's accounts. But the idea is that you have a container in which you are putting your stuff, right? Your stuff is basically your servers and your applications and so forth. So the way we designed it, we had to create a taxonomy of how we leverage these subscriptions, both for cost as well as for security reasons. So we've actually created intranet or internet subscriptions in Azure, for example. The internet ones do face the internet, but have no connectivity into MetLife. You can use them for like marketing sites and things like that. The intranet is an extension of our data center. It's internally facing, and any internet connectivity would be backhauled through our data center. Now what that means is if I got a VPN into work from home, I'm actually going through our data center to get to Azure to access that internally facing system, which might be a customer service type of a system, as an example. We've isolated with our taxonomy production from development and test. We have tagged everything that we put up in the cloud, so we have billing. Later I'll talk about some of the tools that we use for billing so that we can show which environments at a very granular level are being charged and they go to the appropriate cost account. And then we have this concept of a shared services subscription. So while we have apps running in these subscriptions that I've talked about, these containers that I've talked about, the shared services is an extension that is accessible from any of those application-based subscriptions, so that we can do things like providing managed file transfer or providing backup and patching and other kinds of services that you would otherwise expect if you were, for example, in your own data center. So some of the things we need to think about that when we think about that is to make sure that we have our software licensing again covered. We want to make sure that the things that we put into that shared services subscription are covered properly in our contract. And we want to look at network bandwidth and egress costs. Network bandwidth might be, do I need to send a bunch of large software packages or data packages across the wire where I might not have enough network bandwidth for the timing or performance that I need. Egress charges might be, if I have an Avamar backup agent sitting on every one of my servers, I certainly don't want to back up back into my own data center if that environment's in the cloud. I want it to back up locally within the cloud that it's in, and I want it to report back just on the control channel to the mothership so that our operations guys can then restore something if they need it. You don't want to have to suck up the egress charges from any of these cloud providers because they'll eat your lunch. This is kind of what it looks like. It's pretty simple, okay? NetBond back into MetLife, but I wanted to give this visual so you got a picture of, S1, S2, and S3 is where the applications are running. The shared services, all of those infrastructure services that I talked about are what are running in the shared services segment there, okay? These are some examples, okay? So network services, you gotta have DNS, security scanning, right? You wanna be able to scan your environments for vulnerabilities, authentication, so things like SiteMinder for web access management, backup, talked about Avamar, patching your servers, being able to log both for security logging and application logging, batch scheduling, such as we use workload scheduler from IBM, monitoring agents, SMTP gateway, if we wanted to send out emails, do we want to backhaul that through our data center or use an SMTP gateway from the cloud? The ability to do data replication, obviously HA&DR, managed file transfer. We use Informatica, but we're going to have the ability to actually leverage a managed file transfer agent that's out in the cloud as well. Enterprise service bus, API management that I talked about so that we can abstract away systems, and a number of others that you see there. All right. One other thing I mentioned to you was this concept of SDA, the software delivery automation. And I talked about some of this earlier already, but we're introducing new processes and tools for developers. Today we're using the legacy tools that you guys see along your left side on the chart. I'm sorry, your right side on the chart, my left. And the developers, I'll tell you, will be dancing in the streets when we retire some of these tools. They're actually looking very much to get to the new tool sets that you see in the blue. And that includes, and every one of these we've deployed already and we're using. We're just starting to roll it out across the number of applications and application teams that we have. We've got some 2,600 apps that run globally within MetLife. So there's a number of teams, less than that, but a number of teams that support those applications that we're moving over to this new stack. And essentially, we're trying to drive to the point where we have continuous integration and continuous deployment. And the way we tie that back into the cloud program, and why these two programs are sister programs, the way I like to say it, is that I want that ability for someone to go in and generate an environment from the automation that we've created, and then an application team to be able to just configure their software tool set to automatically push to that new environment that's been created, whether it's on the cloud or on-prem, same thing. They don't need to know, but it should be very simple. If you think about it, with the number of thousands of developers that we have, whether MetLife employees or some of the onshore and offshore partners that we leverage, we want to make them as efficient as possible because our goal is to deliver stuff to the business so that we can increase revenue or reduce costs and increase that spread between revenue and cost. Okay. So on the cloud management side, you got to manage and monitor all this stuff that's out there. You got to bill for it. Okay, so I just wanted to give you guys a flavor for the kinds of things, the kinds of tooling that we use. So if you think of the ITIL stuff, right? Request, incident, problem, change, even release management and so forth, we use ServiceNow for that. And we've integrated to ServiceNow for all of the automation. So like I said before, same place you go order your iPhone, if you have access to do so, if you have the privilege to do so, that's where you go get your development or test server, right? We use the BMC tool set basically for the orchestration layer. So all of the blueprints will be going into the BMC, the BMC tool set, that repository. What we have today that we started with, that we're moving into BMC as we speak, is had been written on older versions of some of the BMC tooling and some PowerShell scripting that our guys did as we went through and started automating it. But to be at the robustness that we want to, and to be able to support that metadata layer of the future that I talked about, where it'll be even simpler to basically spin up an entire application, including its load balancing, its firewalls, its DNS, and everything, then we're going to leverage this tool set in BMC because it'll have the capability to do that. We use Apptio already internally, and we've already linked it in and hooked it up with the cloud providers so that we can get the reporting and we know how to do the chargeback for all this stuff. We have monitoring on servers with BMC Patrol, again, more BMC products, and then we've got some exploration going on right now, again, irrespective of internal or external, on application performance management. Tools like Dynatrace and AppDynamics and these, where we want to look at the end-to-end profile of performance of an application so we know if there's a particular business service that's dependent on something running on this infrastructure, we'll know how it's performing and know that before the customer realizes there's a problem. Flexera is something that we look at, that we use to look at our software licensing so that we're able to stay in compliance, which is a very key thing, as I mentioned earlier. And then we use Serba for both capacity management and capacity planning. So at a high level, that's kind of the tool set that we're using within this environment. Last thing I want to talk about is, I almost want to say the future, but it's actually happening right now. There's some people in this room actually that are in what we call the Mod Squad. They're very proud to be that. I'm sure nobody's old enough to remember the Mod Squad. But it's just a squad of folks that we put together when we think, again, bimodal or multimodal IT. These are folks where we took a multidiscipline team, of architects and engineers and developers and security guys, operations, put them all together at one end at the second floor of one of our buildings. And, some magic happened. All of a sudden there was a Kanban board, right? All of a sudden we were using Jira to actually start doing some of this work of figuring out how do we get the cost of this global platform down from an infrastructure perspective. And they worked some magic. It's amazing when you have that kind of collaboration, the magical results that can come out of that. They actually reduced costs by 68%, reduced infrastructure by 75%, reduced cost by 68% from where we were originally on the infrastructure to support this particular platform that we're rolling out in the United States. And we'll be doing it in Turkey and a number of other places around the world. And I think that one of the key components of that was moving from VMs to Docker, okay, to containers. Forget if it's Docker or, go look at whoever you want to look at. But these guys very quickly were able to look at Mesosphere and Kubernetes and Marathon, and Docker, Docker Swarm, Docker Data Center, the whole 9 yards. And very quickly were able to pivot because they were working in this very collaborative environment. Scrum sessions, right? Every morning at 10 to 10:15 for 15 minutes. This is driving toward that infrastructure as software. And I think of MetLife as an insurance company, but hell, we're heading exactly down the path of doing things that are exciting and leading edge because of the ability for us to do this kind of collaboration with one another. So the difference, as if you don't know already, is that with VMs, right, you're going to have some overhead because you have the hypervisor and you have to have a guest OS for every one of your environments, right? I'm sure the penetration of virtualization in all of your companies is pretty high at this point, should be. In some cases, there's a maximum number of VMs that you're able to, the density that you're able to put onto a particular plate, regardless of how cool it looks at Dr. Goodnight's presentation and how many cores that you can have on it. But you're going to get to that limit. The Docker side of it, you just need one OS. It's just, Red Hat or something else that is where you're sharing all of the binaries and the libraries. You don't have to have multiple licenses, you don't have to have multiple copies of the thing, so there's a lot of overhead that is taken away, and you're able to then run your apps there, and we're able to squeeze a lot more on because we don't have that overhead of the hypervisor. A couple of numbers, right? You end up with 20% efficiency from not having, the RAM from the hypervisor needed. You end up with, again, only one copy of the base OS required. So you're able to save 2 gigabytes for each of your OSs. It's pretty significant. And therefore, you only also need one copy of the agents that you need on those boxes. So you save on space, you save on licensing, you save on everything. So that's kind of where we're headed and where we are and where we're driving savings and how we're trying to automate. So I have a couple of key takeaways for you guys, okay? And again, this is all about driving, operating leverage. It's all about driving speed or superior customer experience, okay? We're driving the use of SaaS and IaaS Plus. We're not doing much with PaaS, right? But IaaS Plus for us, is our ability to leverage a vendor's IaaS or our own, plus the data center services, right? So in a sense, it's not quite PaaS, it's almost like our own PaaS, but I call it IaaS Plus. The second one, we've gotten to these standard blueprints. We're driving the blueprints and the automation of those blueprints so that we can get that speed that we need and still drive to standards. And we have the shared services, the data center shared services that we've created so that we're able to get the same kinds of capabilities in the cloud in a very intelligent way, not suffering the cost of egress by sending backups back or by doing things exactly the same way, but by having a cloud approach to be able to have those same capabilities that you require in a data center, controlling it from one central operations center still, which is the guy who's going to always get the phone call in the middle of the night. And we've enabled developers to drive continuous integration and continuous deployment and linked it to our cloud capabilities. And we're driving the exploration of containers so that we can get some more speed and agility and more cost savings. So with that, let me take some questions.
As you've been doing your cloud migration, have you been doing primarily a lift and shift today, or have you been re-architecting the systems to take advantage of the cloud capabilities?
Good question. The question was, as we've been doing our cloud migrations, have we just been doing lift and shift, or have we been re-architecting applications to take advantage of cloud capabilities? I would say in 80% of the cases, they've been lift and shift. But we've had some apps that, and the reason for that is that we did the assessment first. Remember, the first pillar is assessing which ones should go to the cloud and if they're capable of going to the cloud. For the other 20%, we've made some modifications, and I'd say for some new applications that we're developing, we're making sure that they're architected the right way. Again, being latency aware, instrumented, fault tolerant, secure, parallelizable, which is a big one. We want to be able to auto scale up and down, which is a beautiful thing in the cloud where you don't have to pay for your peak. You just pay for what you use. There was another one, I think.
So you mentioned data sovereignty earlier. As insurance companies, you face a heavily regulated industry. Were there any particular challenges that had to be addressed from a compliance and regulatory point of view when you started moving to these relationships in the cloud?
Yeah, so the question was whether we had a significant number of compliance and regulatory issues and processes we had to put in place to be able to handle the regulatory environment we are in an insurance company. And the answer is yes. And we used to have, at the inception of the program, or even before the program, we had a thing that we called the Cloud Council. And it was just a group of folks that had to approve of anything going to the cloud. So as we started funneling things to the Cloud Council, we were able to then get our eyes on those initiatives that might do something in the cloud. And every single one had to have legal review. So the one thing that would be beautiful would be if we could come to a model where what you use is already stamped of approval from our legal and compliance folks. It's not somewhere where we've gotten yet. Even when we absorbed that Cloud Council into our Architecture Review Board, which is already looking at projects, we still look at them one by one by one. And so they're looked at very heavily within the context of each of the projects when they go through that governance review. Now, the kinds of things that they're going to look for, of course, is going to be PII and PCI type information, right? Which they're not going to want to go out at all unless it's encrypted. We have technologies to handle that encryption and tokenization with encryption gateways. And they're going to look at sovereignty regulations, as you mentioned, as part of your question as well, which is I can't take data out of a particular country, so it has to stay in that country. And so we had to have a guarantee that when we provision the environments, those environments are in the cloud of that country, that is resident in that country, or in our data centers that are in that country. Does that answer the question?
You got it, thank you.
Any other? Yes, sir.
How do you manage the deployment of really large software packages to those isolated countries where their bandwidth is probably not within the overhead that you probably want?
The question was, how do we manage the deployment of large software packages, part of our blueprints, right?
Right. So
to countries that don't have a lot of bandwidth, basically.
Well, because you were talking about them being isolated and not being part of the cloud-based distribution of the integrated services and the updates. How do you manage that when a lot of those isolated countries have limited infrastructure?
Yeah. So essentially, what we do is we do not push the software packages at provision time. So if it takes a long time because of limited bandwidth, we do that out of band. So there was a diagram back there that had a binary store within each cloud. And we actually push those independently. so that the packages exist, and all that's going over the channel is really control messages, right? API calls to the cloud to be able to provision the particular environment. Once it's up, some of the BMC tooling, like BMC server automation, takes over and says, okay, agent out there, go do stuff locally within your data center, so it doesn't have to actually talk on the wire. Others? Yes, sir.
We talked about the microservices, and the microservices promotes autonomy, the ability to influence the whole thing, so to kind of like get away from operation one. So right now we have the operation, the architecture, the infrastructure, and production support, all different teams, different silos, and microservice try to integrate in one.
Yep.
How does MetLife?
Okay, so the question was, if I may summarize, with the advent of microservices, it turns our model on its head in a sense, where as opposed to infrastructure and architecture and application development teams all having to interact with one another, the app team's able to do things all by themselves, right? So how does MetLife handle this? So our first microservices platform is this global platform that I'm talking about. It's for sales and servicing capabilities. So our agencies, agents, as well as self-service website for selling some of our products, so that it's assisted or unassisted sales, as well as servicing capability, whether it's self-service servicing, or I go to a website, I'm servicing my account, or changing my beneficiaries or something like that, or I'm talking to a call center. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. That's the first MetLife microservices platform that we're driving. There's some people in this room that are actually participating heavily in that platform, as a matter of fact. And the way that this supports that and gives the application team that independence is that in the end game, the application team, without having to talk to the infrastructure folks, should be able to provision a standard environment for themselves. So one of the blueprints that wasn't on there, it might have been on the future ones, but it would be Docker-based blueprints. So that this way, from the portal, to spin up your own development environment, a developer could actually spin up their own Docker environment that hosted these microservices. There's a couple more things I want to say about this. Number one, the provisioning of dev and test, we've opened it up to developers so that they can do it themselves without approvals even. Okay? And then we get reports on the back end of how many environments we have and what's being spun up or spun down. For production environments, we're not going to be doing it that way. Those are going to be done with the appropriate approvals and so forth, and spun up by someone outside, not the development team. Okay? However, the tool sets that we have to be able to then deploy software, the software development automation that I talked about, that does give a workflow so that a developer could get something up to QA and get tested, without having to, go through any other change processes. We're automating the tickets too, the change tickets. And when you get to production, of course, there's still going to be, the involvement of someone to approve those particular changes. And finally, the other thing I want to mention is with microservices, obviously, you get to the point where you have these very small components that you can scale independently, right? And you can deploy independently. So these are much smaller deployments that we have to do when you're in a microservices type of an environment. Does that help? Any others? All right. Thank you guys for your time.